Joelle has pushed the boundaries of what is possible for 35 years in the tradition of company co-founder Paul Joelle, a Lasker Award-winning physician and a pioneer in pacing and defibrillation. In addition to his seminal research, Dr. Joelle had a reputation for dedication and careful attention to his patients. His legacy lives on at Joelle.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to speak this afternoon. And I also like to extend a warm welcome to our foreign delegates to Singapore. The practice of allowing family members to be present at resuscitation is one that has been discussed over many, many years, over decades. And it's still an issue in Singapore. And Soking has talked about when she was young and innocent. This was also a story long time ago. It's by a US nurse in, I think, the 1980s. Okay? So she said that I was caring for my father at home as he was dying of a metastatic cancer in 1976. One night, he needed medical attention for repeated blockages of his Foley catheter caused by clots forming in his bladder. I called an ambulance and rode with him to an emergency room. As we entered the ER, a nurse directed me to the waiting area. But I had no intention of leaving his side. I told her I was a registered nurse and had been caring for my father and wanted to stay with him. When she held her ground, I asked to speak to the nurse in charge. This is quite typical in Singapore, right? They will want to speak to sister. Then, okay, so what happened was I made no progress with her either. So I requested to see the physician on duty. Yeah, they'll say, so who's your senior doctor? Want to speak to the senior doctor. And that physician agreed to let me stay. I remained at my father's side, held his hand, and coached him in breathing and relaxation techniques during bladder irrigations. And when I sensed that the pain from irrigations was becoming intolerable to him, I asked for additional pain medications. I remained at my father's side. Oh, how come it's repeated? Okay, this experience left me angry at the nurses who would deny me what I felt was my right to be with my father. Had they determined that it was not in my best interest or in my father's for me to stay with him? Had they feared that I would get in the way or might witness something that could later lead to a lawsuit? Were they exercising their authority as guardians of the hospital bureaucratic policies, or was it just blind adherence to common practice? No explanation was offered other than it's hospital policy. And this also is what we face in Singapore, I guess. In Singapore, we have this tradition, you know, that, what happens is when the patient is wheeled into resuscitation or even critical care area, there's this no entry sign. Yeah. And then when, you know, they are just told to sit down, we'll get back to you. And then the minutes will seem like even hours sometimes. And sometimes it's true. We leave them there, sitting there with no answers. They don't even know what's happening. Why have they, you know, what is it very serious, or can they go home and all that? And when they get frustrated, there's this sign that says, you are important, so are our staff. You know, don't abuse our staff. Yeah, so I would just like to ask you, what if you were that family member being told to wait there, you know, in the sitting area, we'll get back to you, we'll update you, and then sometimes they don't even know. When you ask somebody, they say, I do not know where your father is or your mom is. Yeah, what would you do? I think most of my friends here would say that, you know, I will start texting. If it's not in my ED, I will start texting my friends. Hey, are you on duty? Can you check for me? My grandma is in the resus room or something like that. And sometimes, we will try to pull strings, isn't it? Yeah, you would want to be with your family member as well, or you want to be updated. Yeah, so this is something that really happens. But so we have this advantage of being in the network, in the emergency field. Yeah, there has been a lot of literature about this topic and a lot of mixed views. It can be quite controversial. We have ethical issues like what Soking has talked about, end-of-life issues, autonomy, cultural issues too here. And sometimes it depends on different perspectives. I'm going to just go through what the staff perspective is, what's the family perspective and the patient perspective. But a little bit more background. In the 1980s, in the US, there were questions about this issue. And what happened was the Emergency Nurses Association in America came out with guidelines. They saw the need to actually try to have some kind of guidelines that would help family-centered care for their patients in the emergency department. And the guidelines was actually family presence during CPR. Yeah, not just our normal, P2 kind of cases, but actually during CPR, during active resuscitation. And there were literature to support their view that it was actually beneficial. And this was something that, they could, US hospitals could actually follow if they had the support needed. Yeah, so just very quickly, I'd just like to define what I will address in my talk today. When I talk about family presence during resuscitation, or some papers say witness resuscitation, I refer to the ED. A lot of literature show ICU settings or ED settings, and there are one or two that talk about ward, doing CPR in the ward. Should it be witnessed by family members? And I also mean at least one family member in attendance. Sometimes you may have a kampong means a village, requesting to be there. And it also means visual or physical contact with the patient and active medical resuscitation. So there has been studies in Singapore that actually look at staff attitude. I was actually working in the ED during that time, and there was a self-administered survey done to all the nurses and doctors in the ED. The response rate was relatively high, 82.5%. The findings were generally that staff generally did not favor witness resuscitation, and there was more research that was needed. So what is the resistance? It was reported that many of them said that they were afraid that the relatives cannot take it. Yeah, they had traumatic experiences, that the relatives would ask too much questions. Sometimes questions not only about their relative, but the next bed. In Singapore we call it kepo. And sometimes we are afraid that they may interfere with resuscitation or cause the staff extra stress to it. And of course, there were medical legal issues as well. Privacy, confidentiality, you're scared that they will sue you if they think that you did something wrong. So there were other studies as well. Closer to us will be the study in Hong Kong, where they also looked at healthcare staff plus the family members. A lot of studies from US and Europe talked about the benefits of having the family member with the patient if they requested to. That would be because it supports physical and emotional needs, comforts the patient, provides reassurance to both parties. It's also sometimes easier to manage the patient, especially if they are pediatric cases. And dignified death was also addressed, and the grieving process was aided with them being by the side. Of course, there were other opinions that were against family members being there. Things like privacy issues, workload of staff, as described earlier. And then there were some studies, just a few, that talked about majority of healthcare staff who were not in favor of that. The studies mainly came from Hong Kong, South Africa, Singapore, and Turkey. Yeah. So this study was done in Hong Kong in 2011, and it was just a convenient sampling of a survey done by healthcare workers as well as their families. The findings was majority of healthcare staff had a negative attitude towards family presence during resuscitation, but most of them agreed that if there was a bereavement team or an escort or someone that would be able to be with the family member, then it's okay to let them in. But most family members agreed, that they were for being there for their loved one. So there's this conflict. And similarly in Singapore, we also had a study in 2006 after that first study, and it it compared the healthcare workers as well as the public, and the findings were also similar to the Hong Kong study. But of course, the conclusion was more research needs to be done, because these are on attitudes, perceptions. Yeah. So how about the perspective from a family member? Many of them who wanted to be with the patient during resuscitation, if they were asked to, or at least given a choice, they talked about dignified death. Help them with the grief process. There was one article that had, it was a qualitative data that was presented, and it said that, when I say till death do I part, I really mean that. I really want to be with my loved one till death do I part. And it's also, their rights. They feel that it's their right as a family member to be there during the resuscitation. And no hospital policy could, separate them from that. Those that were against, very little evidence was there, or very little was reported at least. There was one pilot study by Robinson that actually was discontinued because they felt that the benefits of the family being around was so good, and there were actually low rates of post-traumatic behavior in the family, or lower rates of anxiety and all that. So those fears that we sometimes have were disregarded. Yeah, it was just said, no, it doesn't happen. And the benefits were better. There was an Israel study. It showed that actually there were some negative perception, but this study showed, scenarios that had visible bleeding, poor resusc outcomes, and also it compared between gender. So they say that females, more than males, were more likely to say no to being with that family member. It compared staff as well as lay people. And across staff and lay people, there were no differences in their opinion about whether the family members should be there. So how about the patients? We talk about relatives' right, whether they have the right to witness the resuscitation. It really depends whether you feel the paternalistic benefits for this case. It's on a case-to-case basis, and how often you are more inclined to be with your patient or for your patient. So how about the patient? There was a study done that actually asked patients who had gone through resuscitation and survived. Okay, some of them were for, but not all. They said that for those that were for being, for letting their relatives in during the time of resuscitation, they said that it did maybe give them some reassurance. It helped them, the relatives, with a grief process in case they died, but they didn't die. And it was also probably their rights. They talked about their rights. If they wish to have their family member with them, it's their right. For those against, there were some against as well. The relatives, they're scared that the relatives may be traumatized. That's why they say, I'd rather not have my daughter in the resusc room with me during this time. Privacy issues were very real to the patients themselves. And some of them actually said, no, I do not want my relative in there because we are not close. They're not close bonds at all. And so this actually tells us that, sometimes it's not always so when, literature actually shows that there is grounds for letting relatives in. Sometimes we do need to act on behalf of our patients. And some patients actually do not want their family present during the resuscitation. Let me just read some quotes to you. It says, for this, it says, it would take my family, it would make my family too sad to watch me nearly dying. But if it were them being worked on, I would be in there. It doesn't matter if I'm sad or not. And I guess I'm stupid telling you that I'm not sure I want my family to be in with me, but I certainly want to be in there for them. So it really is a bit weird that, they would want to be with their family during that resuscitation, but when the family member is a patient, but when they are a patient, they may or may not want. So we do need to bear this in mind. I guess sometimes when they come in a collapsed state, we cannot ask them. Yeah, and so what do we do? Yeah, so where do we go from here? I've just got 3 points. Good death. Okay, that means for the patient, if he's dying and, yeah, we need to think about what is in the best interest of the patient and our duty of care for the patient and his rights. Yeah, good grief, that's for the relatives. Yeah, for family members, will their presence in the resuscitation be able to give them a better release of their grievances? Would that help in their grieving process? Yeah, so that's good grief and good work. That means us. Yeah, we are patients advocates. We are the ones that are supposed to act on behalf of our patients. But right now, there are also a lot of issues about family-centered care for our patients. Yesterday, during the afternoon track, we talked about palliative care in the ED. So where do we go from here? Yeah, there's still a lot of things to think about, a lot of issues to think about. Do we continue with our tradition of having policies that, say no entry to everybody, all the relatives, no entry to you? Or do we go by the evidence that, some people may be helped and cared for if we do allow some of them? And if we do allow them in, is there any support for them? Are we able to cope with our space constraints, with our workload? Sometimes we do need training in communication. We do need training in, how to handle the grieving process, how to handle bereavement, as well as maybe experience in dealing with such things. There's a need for protocols to guide staff in handling family members, as well as there's a need, especially in Singapore, for cultural awareness. Just to conclude, this is a really important issue to explore. It's important to make sure that our care, especially as healthcare professionals in the ED, includes family-centered care, so that our patients are well cared for. My first few slides showed that the Emergency Nurses Association in America started and spearheaded this, and they came up with guidelines. I think the emergency nurses can also make a difference in Singapore. We have a chapter, if you do not know already. It's under the Singapore Nurses Association, and it'll be good if we have more of you join the chapter, and so that we can actually make a difference, and we can actually promote our field as well as update ourselves on what is current and all that. And of course, this would be really, really good. I'm sure that you want to know that one day our profession as emergency nurses can go on and make a difference in the lives of patients as well as their family members. So I hope that maybe one day we may consider whether the no entry sign should be lifted at all, or if not, what more can we do and work within the protocols that we have. With that, I thank you.